your support and commitment on electing me as your next sheriff. A vote for me is a vote for service and protection. I'm committed and dedicated to our community. So on November 3rd, elect me, Eric Bryant, Sheriff of Sumter County.
Pool party at Jesse's. Can you drive? I'm toasted.
No, I'm high. But I can order us a ride.
Okay.
Friendly reminder, don't drive high. If you feel different, you drive different.
Good character, sound judgment, maturity, social awareness, and a commitment to serve all people are characteristics that your Chief Magistrate must possess. As a candidate for Crisp County Chief Magistrate, I offer these characteristics to you, and I ask for your vote and your support. We're living in a crucial time. Many things have changed, but my commitment to serve the citizens of Crisp County has never wavered. Whether you vote by mail-in ballot, early vote, or go to the polls on Tuesday, November 3rd, I'm Isaac Owens, and I ask for your vote and your support.
Thanks for watching Cordial's WSST with great programs and putting community first because local matters.
Cordial's WSST because local matters.
The J.W. Williams Funeral Directors have been proudly serving the people of this community since 1918. Service is our motto. The poor, the rich, the middle class and all are given the best of care and attention at all times. You have the privilege to select what you want. In your time of need, contact the capable, the competent, and the dependable staff of the J.W. Williams Funeral Home who is genuinely concerned with your care. At J.W. Williams Funeral Home, you are aptly served by the proprietor president, Deacon Arthur L. Parker, who continues the traditions and values set forth by the past president, Dr. Napoleon Williams. Your announcers for the J.W. Williams Funeral Home Sunday morning program are Deacon Arthur L. Parker, Reverend Isaac H. Owens, Mrs. Calandra Wilkerson Parker, Minister Frankie Harmon, Miss Sandra Johnson, and Deacon Earl Clark, Jr.
And good morning, friends. We come to you this morning to bring announcements, dedications, and songs. We certainly hope that your day may be brighter after listening to our program. The family of Mrs. Janice Faye Brown Watkins of Vienna, Georgia, and of United States Army veteran Mr. James Irvin Porter, Dale, Georgia. The family of Mrs. Ethel Q. Johnson Outlaw of Davenport, Florida. The family of retired educator Mrs. Elma Brona Sneed Golfin of Americus, Georgia. The family of the infant Cole Jamel Taylor of Cornell, Georgia. The family of Mr. Michael Waters Sr. of Cornell, Georgia. The family of Mr. Justin Bernard Bryant of Vienna, Georgia. Of Deacon John Lee Smith Sr. of Cordell, Georgia. The family of Mr. Lonnie Kendrick of Warner Robins, Georgia, would like to thank their many friends for the food, the flowers, the condolences, and all other expressions of sympathy and kindness shown to them during their hours of sorrow and bereavement during the past week. Mrs. Janice Faye Brown Watkins, age 59, of 319 Fairfield Apartment, Vienna, Georgia, died Monday, October 1st, at her residence in Vienna, Georgia. The funeral service for Mrs. Janice Faye Brown Watkins was held Sunday, October 11th, graveside at the Vienna City Cemetery in Vienna, Georgia. Her Reverend Frederick Murray, pastor of the Turkey Creek Baptist Church of Lilly, Georgia, officiated. Survivors include her loving and devoted children, Mr. Rodriguez T. Brown and his wife, Mrs. Deborah Brown of Chesapeake, Virginia, and Mrs. Samantha S. Stewart and her husband, Mr. Keon Stewart of Irving, Texas. Her loving grandchildren, Brianna, Dalen, Dravian, and Davion. Her loving and devoted mother, Mother Leslie May Harris of Vienna, Georgia. Her beloved sisters, Mrs. Betty B. Bryant and her husband, Deacon Hentley Bryant of Vienna, Georgia. Mrs. Evelyn Brown of Virginia Beach, Virginia. Mrs. Tammy Brown and her husband, Mr. Verket Brown of Peachtree Corners, Georgia. And Mrs. Rhonda L. Zellner and her husband, Mr. Walter Zellner of Warner Robins, Georgia. Her beloved brothers, Mr. Maurice B. Brown and his wife, Miss Tamala Brown of Warner Robins, Georgia. And Mr. Wilmer Earl Brown and his wife, Mrs. Carolyn Brown of Vienna, Georgia. A beloved uncle, Mr. James Brown of St. Petersburg, Florida. A host of nieces, nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Mrs. Janice Faye Brown Watkins, age 59, of 319 Fairfield Apartments, Vienna, Georgia. United States Army veteran, Mr. James Irvin Porter, better known as Sugar Man, age 57, of 309 Oak Avenue, Cordele, Georgia, died Tuesday, October 6th at the Chris Regional Hospital in Cordele, Georgia. The graveside memorial service for United States Army veteran Mr. James Irvin Porter was held Sunday, October 11th at the Bethel Cemetery in Cordele, Georgia. The Reverend Isaac H. Owens, pastor of the Mount Calvary Baptist Church, officiated. Survivors include his loving and devoted daughter, Miss Paulette Porter of Cordele, Georgia, his beloved grandchildren, Xavian, Zahara, Raven, and Romeo, his loving and devoted mother, Mrs. Thelma Beach Porter of Cordele, Georgia, his beloved sisters, Mrs. Rondalyn Barron and her husband, Mr. Kelvin Barron, Mrs. Christy Luttrell and her husband, Mr. Wayne Luttrell, and Miss Janet Porter, all of Cordele, Georgia. His beloved brothers, Mr. Harrison Porter and his wife, Mrs. Angela Porter of Atlanta, Georgia, Mr. Corey Porter and his wife, Mrs. Carrie Porter, and Deacon Donald Talbot and his wife, Mrs. Sharon Talbot of Cordele, Georgia. His beloved aunts and uncle, Miss Marie Porter, Miss Geraldine Porter Ford, Deacon Eddie Porter Jr., and Mr. Booker T. Porter. A beloved great aunt, Mrs. Gladys Lewis, a host of nieces and nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. United States Army veteran, Mr. James Irvin Porter, age 57, of 309 West Oak Avenue, Cordele, Georgia. Mrs. Ethel Q. Johnson Outlaw, age 59, of Davenport, Florida, died Monday, October 5th at the Good Shepherd Hospice in Auburndale, Florida. The funeral service for Mrs. Ethel Q. Johnson Outlaw was held Monday, October 12th, graveside at the Sunnyside Cemetery in Cordele, Georgia. Her pastor, Dr. Kervin B. Lee, officiated. Survivors include her loving and devoted husband, Mr. Napoleon Outlaw of Davenport, Florida. Her loving and devoted son, Mr. Napoleon Outlaw II, and his wife, Mrs. Candace Outlaw, and Mr. Eric Outlaw and his wife, Mrs. Courtney Outlaw, Mr. Quentin Outlaw and his wife, Mrs. Noel Outlaw. Her precious grandchildren, Napoleon III, Elise, Aiden, Jaden, and Mackenzie. Her beloved parents, Mr. Lindsay and Mrs. Mary Johnson. Her loving and devoted sister, Mrs. Sylvia Garrett, and her husband, Mr. Dale Garrett. Mrs. Annie Johnson Colvin and her husband, Mr. Ben Colvin, Miss Yolanda Johnson, her beloved in-law, Mr. Jerome Outlaw and his wife, Mrs. Ola Mae Outlaw, Mr. Victor Outlaw and his wife, Mrs. Sandra Outlaw, and Miss Valerie Outlaw. A host of nieces, nephews, cousins, other relatives, and many special friends survive Mrs. Ethel Q. Johnson Outlaw, age 59, of Davenport, Florida. Retired educator, Mrs. Elma Brona Sneed Golfin, age 74, of 807 Kings Way, Americus, Georgia, died Wednesday, October 7th at the Phoebe Sumter Medical Center in Americus, Georgia. The funeral service for retired educator Mrs. Elma Brona Sneed Golfin was held Monday, October 12th, graveside at Staley Memorial Gardens in Americus, Georgia. Her pastor, the Reverend Jermaine Harris, pastor of the Allen Chapel AME Church, officiated. Survivors include her loving and devoted husband of 31 years, Mr. Willie R. Golfin, her beloved daughter, Mrs. Tierra Sneed Floyd, and her husband, Mr. Lonnie Charles Floyd, all of Americus, Georgia. Two beloved granddaughters, Miss Natasha Floyd of Dunwoody, Georgia, and Miss Julia Floyd of Americus, Georgia. Her beloved brothers, retired Lieutenant Colonel Johnny Broner and his wife, Mrs. Dorothy Broner, Mr. Rufus Broner and his wife, Mrs. Michelle Broner, all of Jacksonville, Arkansas. Retired Major Lester Broner Jr. and his wife, Mrs. Anna Broner of Kennesaw, Georgia. Retired Sergeant Ronald Pace of Seattle, Washington, and Mr. Dennis Pace of Decatur, Georgia. Her loving and devoted sisters, Mrs. Janet B. Smith and Miss Fanny Anthony, both of Americus, Georgia. Mrs. Regina Clark and her husband, Sir John Clark of Stockbridge, Georgia. Her beloved aunts, Mrs. Minnie Lee Broner Battle, Mrs. Lily Taylor Cladd, Mrs. Elnora Taylor Gervin, Mrs. Lucy Bell Taylor Sims, all of Americus, Georgia, and missionary Lois Taylor of Warner Robins, Georgia. Her sisters-in-law, Mrs. Janice Davis and her husband, Mr. Donnie Davis of Byram, Georgia. Mrs. Belle Broner, Beverly Broner of Miami, Florida, and Miss Livonia Sneed Henderson of McDonald, Georgia. Two brothers-in-law, the Reverend Freddie Golphin of Oglethorpe, Georgia, and Mr. James Eddie Golphin of Memphis, Tennessee. A host of nieces, nephews, cousins, other relatives, and special friends, Mrs. Addie P. Joseph of South Carolina, Mrs. Linda Didell Pope of Americus, Georgia, and Miss Brenda Jackson of Montezuma, Georgia. Her godson, Mr. Anthony T. Ware of Americus, Georgia, survived. Retired educator, Mrs. Elma Broner Sneed Golphin, age 74, of 807 Kings Way, Americus, Georgia. The infant Cole Taylor of 80108 North 15th Street, Cordele, Georgia, died Wednesday, September 30th at Emory Midtown Hospital in Atlanta, Georgia. The graveside funeral service for the infant Cole Taylor was held Thursday, October 15th at the Shady Grove Cemetery in Rochelle, Georgia. Reverend Mario Harris officiated. Survivors include his beloved parents, Mr. Kavashi Taylor and Miss Kateria Maddox of Cordele, Georgia. A beloved brother, little Kason Taylor of Cordele, Georgia. His grandparents, Miss Vanessa Blackshear of Abbeville, Georgia. Mr. Corey Maddox, Miss Tina Redding, and Mr. Stevie Taylor, all of Cordele, Georgia. His great-grandparents, Mr. Jerry and Mrs. Rosa Blackshear of Rochelle, Georgia. Deacon Lauren and Mrs. Mary Wellens of Cordele, Georgia. And Mrs. China Ezel of Araby, Georgia. His great-great-grandmother, Mrs. Mary Scott of Rochelle, Georgia. His aunts and uncles, Mr. Adam Reed, Jr., and Miss Kayla Dixon, both of Rochelle, Georgia. Miss Erica Redding, Miss Sabrina Taylor, Miss Kayla Taylor, all of Cordele, Georgia, and a host of other relatives survived the infant Cole Jamel Taylor of 108 North 15th Street, Cordele, Georgia. Mr. Michael Jerome Waters, Sr., age 62, of 208 West 27th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia, died Saturday, October 10, at the Chris Regional Hospital in Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Mr. Michael Jerome Waters, Sr., was held Friday, October 16th, graveside at the Sunnyside Cemetery in Cordele, Georgia. His pastor, Reverend Nikita J. Lester, pastor of the New William Grove Baptist Church, officiated. The eulogy was delivered by his beloved sister-in-law, Evangelist Nevada Hall Bass. Survivors include his loving and devoted wife, Mrs. Gwendolyn Dalster Waters of Cordele, Georgia. His beloved and devoted son, Mr. Torio Waters, and Mr. Michael Waters, Jr., and his wife, Mrs. Kimberly Waters, both of Cordele, Georgia. His adored grandchildren, Sergeant Quenisha Waters of South Korea, Ms. Jalen Waters, and Mr. Michael B. Water, both of Cordele, Georgia. His grandchildren, Aylin, Javian, and Waltavius. His beloved sister, Mrs. Georgia M. Waters Walker of Cordele, Georgia. A beloved brother, Mr. Christopher Porter, and his wife, Mrs. Sophia Porter of Lauderhill, Florida. His beloved aunts and uncles, Mrs. Cora Royal and her husband, Buford Royal, Mrs. Neffy Harvey, and Mrs. Gladys Porter Lewis, all of Cordele, Georgia. Mrs. Janie Mae Smith and her husband, Mr. Freddie Smith of Atlanta, Georgia. His parents-in-law, Mrs. Gradine Ford and her husband, Deacon Tommy Ford Jr., Deacon Charles Doster Sr. and his wife, Mrs. Joanne Doster, all of Cordele, Georgia. His brothers and sisters-in-law, Mrs. Teresa Doster Brown, Mrs. Linda Maddox, Mrs. Joyce Doster, and Mr. Charles Doster Jr. and his wife, Mrs. Christine Doster, all of Cordele, Georgia. Evangelist Levada Hall Bass of Warner Robins, Georgia. A host of nieces and nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Mr. Michael Waters Sr., age 62, of 208 West 27th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia. Mr. Justin Bernard Bryant, age 30, of 4748 Franklin Road, Vienna, Georgia, died Saturday, October 10th at the Houston Medical Center in Warner Robins, Georgia, of injuries sustained in an automobile accident. The funeral service for Mr. Justin Bernard Bryant, age 30, was held Saturday, October 17th, graveside at the Macedonia Baptist Church Cemetery, Drayton Community, Vienna, Georgia. His cousin, Dr. Thaddeus Lakeler, pastor of the Mount Moriah Baptist Church, officiated. Survivors include his living and devoted parents, Mr. James Bryant Jr. and Mrs. Gertrude Blythe Bryant of Vienna, Georgia. His beloved brother, Mr. James Bryant III, and his wife, Mrs. Nikki Bryant. His loving grandmother, Mrs. Sandy Mae Bryant of Vienna, Georgia. His godson, Master Zewarren B. Hendrick of Warner Robins, Georgia. His beloved nephews, Master James Bryant IV, Master Israel Bryant, both of Great Falls, Montana. His beloved aunts and uncles, Mrs. Carol Peacock and her husband, Mr. Henry Peacock of Vienna, Georgia. Mrs. Dorothy Jackson and her husband, Mr. Roosevelt Jackson of Jacksonville, Florida. Mr. Calvin Black Jr. of Pinehurst, Georgia. Mr. Johnny Bryant of Denmark. Mr. Isaac Black of Vienna, Georgia. Mrs. Annie Lawson of Oglethorpe, Georgia. Mrs. Jacqueline Hoyt of Americus, Georgia. Miss Uriel Black of Vienna, Georgia. Mr. Gerald Black of Atlanta, Georgia. Mrs. Tammy Black of Vienna, Georgia. Mr. Terry Black and his wife, Mrs. Salitha Black of Perry, Georgia. Mrs. Lysandra Woodson and her husband, Mr. Rico Woodson of Vienna, Georgia. Mr. Winnie Black of Perry, Georgia. Miss Eliza Black of Warner Robins, Georgia. His beloved great aunts and great uncles, Mrs. Maddie Clark and her husband, Mr. Jimmy Clark of Miami, Florida. Mr. Vonnie Jordan of St. Petersburg, Florida. Mrs. Annie Jordan of Vienna, Georgia. Mrs. Vernette Jordan of Atlanta, Georgia. Mrs. Ida Hicks of Vienna, Georgia. Mrs. Carolyn Gresham and her husband, Mr. Quentin Gresham of Atlanta, Georgia, Mrs. Ola Hall and her husband, Mr. Dennis Hall of Albany, Georgia, Mr. Sanford Cross of Americus, Georgia, and Mrs. Ernestine Jordan of Sanford, Florida. A host of cousins who were more like his sisters and brothers, a host of other relatives, and many, many special friends survived Mr. Justin Bernard Bryant, age 30, of 4748 Franklin Road, Vienna, Georgia. Deacon John Lee Smith Sr., age 74, of 206 West 19th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia, died Friday, October 9th at his residence in Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Deacon John Lee Smith Sr., age 74, was held Saturday, October 17, graveside at the Gibbs Chapel Cemetery, Pena Community, Cordele, Georgia. His pastor, the Reverend Willie James Felton, pastor of the Mount Bethel Baptist Church, officiated. Survivors include his beloved and devoted children, Mr. John Lee Smith Jr. and his wife, Mrs. LaTrondra Smith, Mrs. Selena West, Ms. Irene Smith, and Mr. Ricky Smith, all of Cordele, Georgia. Mr. Jonathan Smith and his wife, Mrs. Lucretia Smith, of Port Richey, Florida. Miss Melissa Smith of Fayetteville, North Carolina. Mr. Brandon Clark and his wife, Mrs. Prenda Clark. Miss Wendy Wilson, Mrs. Michelle Johnson, and her husband, Mr. Dwight Johnson. Mr. Chris Pratt and his wife, Mrs. Sand Pratt. Mr. Marcus Pratt. Mr. Shan Pratt and his wife, Mrs. Shanice Pratt. Mr. Mike Pratt and his wife, Mrs. Mary Pratt, and Mr. Eric Pratt, all of Cordele, Georgia. 33 beloved grandchildren, 28 great-grandchildren, a beloved and devoted sister, Mrs. Ethel Mumphrey, and her husband, Deacon Edward Mumphrey Sr. of Cordele, Georgia. His sisters-in-law, Mrs. Eula Harvey and Mrs. Glenda Harvey. His brother-in-law, Mr. Michael Harvey, and his wife, Mrs. Mary Harvey. A dear friend, Miss Kimberly Smith. A host of nieces and nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends, to include Mr. Mike Thomas, survived Deacon John Lee Smith Sr., age 74, of 206 West 19th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia. Mr. Lonnie Kendrick, 107 Heather Street, Warner Robins, Georgia, died Tuesday, October 6th at Houston Medical Center in Warner Robins, Georgia, of injuries sustained in an automobile accident. The remains were cremated. Survivors include his loving and devoted son, Elder Lonnie Akins, and his wife, Mrs. Mary Akins of Lincoln, Delaware. Bishop Daniel Akins and his wife, Mrs. Vonnie Akins of Dallas, Texas. His beloved grandchildren, DeJuan, David, Deshaun, Daniel, Tyrell, Brandon, Denise, Alvin and his wife, Amanda, Davion, and Tammy. 18 beloved great-grandchildren, his beloved and devoted sisters, Mrs. Christine Wiggins and Mrs. Martha Warren, both of Warner Robins, Georgia, Mrs. Mary Burrows of Camilla, Georgia, a beloved brother, Mr. Eddie B. Kendrick of Ashburn, Georgia, a host of nieces and nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Mr. Lonnie Kendrick, 107 Heather Street, Warner Robins, Georgia. Again, the family of Mrs. Janice Faye Brown Watkins of Vienna, Georgia. The family of United States Army veteran Mr. James Irvin Porter of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Miss Ethel Q. Johnson Outlaw of Davenport, Florida. The family of retired educator Mrs. Elma Brona Sneed Golphin of Americus, Georgia. The family of the infant Cole Jamel Taylor of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Mr. Michael Waters Sr. of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Mr. Justin Bernard Bryant of Vienna, Georgia. The family of Deacon John Lee Smith Sr. of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Mr. Lonnie Kendrick of Warner Robins, Georgia, would like to thank their many friends for all of the many kindnesses shown to them during their hours of sorrow and bereavement during the past week. May God bless each of you is their prayer. The J.W. Williams Funeral Directors serving Cordele and Vienna were in charge of each of these arrangements during the past week. And now, it is certainly with the deepest regret that we make the following announcements. Deacon Arthur James McEntee, age 80, of 130 Oak Street, Lilly, Georgia, died Saturday, October 10th, at the home of his beloved son in Albany, Georgia. Survivors include his loving and devoted children, Mr. Willie James McEntee and his wife, Mrs. Jackie McEntee of Columbia, South Carolina, Mr. Wilbert Leon Davis and his wife, Mrs. Brycelyn Davis of Macon, Georgia, Mr. Artavius Jamar McEntee and his wife, Mrs. Noel McEntee of Albany, Georgia, Mrs. Monica Denise McKellar and her husband, Mr. Charles McKellar of Lilly, Georgia, Mrs. Dolores Michelle Anderson and her husband, Mr. Ray Anderson of St. Petersburg, Florida, Mrs. Renata Woodham and her husband, Mr. Darnell Woodham of Lilly, Georgia, and Miss Lola McEntee and her husband, Mr. Richard McEntee of Albany, Georgia. 27 beloved grandchildren, 32 great-grandchildren, his beloved sisters, Mrs. Charlie Louise Williams of Bainbridge, Georgia, Mrs. Sarah Frances Moffett, and Mrs. Lily Duhart Toots, both of Warner Robins, Georgia. Mrs. Barbara Faye Goins and her husband, Mr. Arthur Goins, of Pineview, Georgia. Mrs. Jacqueline Lewis and her husband, Mr. Alexander Lewis, of Hope Mills, North Carolina. Miss Diana Whitfield of Colorado Springs, Colorado. And Mrs. Donna Howard and her husband, Mr. Marcus Howard, of Bonaire, Georgia. His beloved brothers, Mr. Wayman McEntee of Vienna, Georgia, Mr. Charlie James Rush and his wife, Mrs. Linda Rush of Covington, Georgia, Mr. Billy Joe Whitfield and his wife, Mrs. Cheryl Whitfield of Decatur, Georgia, Mr. Willie Jr. Whitfield of Vienna, Georgia, Mr. Jerome Whitfield and his wife, Mrs. Whitfield of Indiana, Indianapolis, and Mr. Terry Lamar Whitfield and his wife, Mrs. Joanna Whitfield of Pineview, Georgia. His beloved aunts and uncles, Mrs. Ethel Station, Mrs. Ethel Station, and her husband, Mr. James Station of Hydesville, Maryland, Mr. Essie James Coffin, and Mr. Robert Coffin, both of Decatur, Georgia, Mrs. Mary Archibald and her husband, Mr. Ralph Archibald of Jonesboro, Georgia, and Mrs. Thelma Coffin Hopper of Cordele, Georgia. His brothers-in-law, Mr. Jimmy Sanders, and his wife, Mrs. Patty Sanders of Cordele, Georgia, Deacon Jose Sanders, and Mr. Louis Sanders and his wife, Mrs. Mamie Sanders, both of Lilly, Georgia. A host of nieces and nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Deacon Arthur James McEntee, age 80, of 130 Oak Street, Lilly, Georgia. The funeral service for Deacon James McEntee, age 80, will be held today, Sunday, October 18, at 12 noon, graveside at the Forest Chapel Church Cemetery in Pinehurst, Georgia. His pastor, the Reverend Willie Green, pastor of the Forest Chapel Baptist Church, will officiate. Miss Louise Denise Barron, age 75, of 113 West 5th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia, died Wednesday, October 7th, at the Phoebe Putney Memorial Hospital in Albany, Georgia. Survivors include her loving and devoted children, Mr. Willie James Thorpe and his wife, Mrs. Melissa Thorpe, Mr. Kelvin Barron Sr. and his wife, Mrs. Rolanda Barron, Mr. Carl Barron, and Miss Cynthia Barron, all of Cordele, Georgia. Mr. Nicholas Barron and his wife, Mrs. Michelle Barron of Jacksonville, Florida. 19 beloved grandchildren, 14 great-grandchildren, a beloved sister, Mother Mitt Bell Denard of Cordele, Georgia, a host of nieces, nephews, cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Miss Louise Denise Barron, age 75, 113 West 5th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Miss Louise Denise Denard, age 75, will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. Little J.C. Adore Hawkins of 505 West 23rd Avenue, Cordele, Georgia, died Friday, October 16, at the Chris Regional Hospital in Cordele, Georgia. Survivors include her loving parents, Mr. Jeremiah Hawkins, Miss Jessica Harvey of Cordele, Georgia, a beloved brother, Master Joshua Harvey of Cordele, Georgia, beloved grandparents, Mr. Charles Dawson and Miss Carol Dawson of Cordele, Georgia, and Miss Brenda Hawkins of Albany, Georgia. His aunts and uncles, Mrs. Rashonda McKeever and her husband, Mr. Reginald McKeever, Mrs. Melinda Tuff and her husband, Mr. Cameron Tuff, Mr. James Otis Harvey, and Mr. Samuel K. Maynard, all of Cordele, Georgia. Mr. Chodrick Hawkins, Mrs. Gladys Cole, Mrs. Jamisha Henderson, and Miss Raleigh Henderson, Miss Jamaica Bryant and Miss Eliza Hawkins all have been in Georgia, and a host of other relatives survive little J.C. Adore Hawkins of 505 West 23rd Avenue, Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for little J.C. Adore Hawkins will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. Mrs. Benny May Shorter Barthel, age 74, of 2812 South 10th Street, Cordele, Georgia, died Saturday, October 17 at Neverson Health in Macon, Georgia. Survivors include her loving and devoted husband, Mr. Albert Barthel of Cordele, Georgia, her loving and devoted children, Mr. Calvin Barthel and Mrs. Angela Johnson, and her husband, Mr. Reginald Johnson of Cordele, Georgia, her beloved grandchildren, Mr. Latravius Johnson and her husband, Mr. Brooke Johnson of Charlotte, North Carolina, and Mr. Keon Johnson of Cordele, Georgia. Her great-grandchildren, DeJuan, Bryson, and Beverly. A beloved sister, Mrs. Geraldine Putman, and her husband, Mr. Charles Putman of Cordele, Georgia. A beloved brother, Mr. Jake Shorter, and his wife, Mrs. Charlene Shorter of Cordele, Georgia. Her loving aunts, Mother Mary Savage Butler, and Mother Grace Patrick, both of Cordele, Georgia. A host of nieces and nephews, many cousins, other relatives, and many, many sorrowing friends survive. Mrs. Benny May Shorter Barthel, age 74, of 2812 South 10th Street, Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for Mrs. Benny May Shorter Barthel, age 74, will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. The J.W. Williams Funeral Directors, serving Cordele and Diana, are in charge of each of these arrangements during this week. And now, for an out-of-area funeral announcement, United States Marine Corps veteran, Mr. Gerald A. Coffin of Valdosta, Georgia, died Thursday, October 15th at his residence in Valdosta, Georgia. Locally, he survived by a beloved mother, Mrs. Jocelyn Williams Lewis of Cordele, Georgia, his beloved sister, Mrs. Marletta Guest of Cordele, Georgia, and a host of other relatives, and many sorrowing friends survive. United States Marine Corps veteran, Mr. Gerald A. Coffin of Valdosta, Georgia. There will be a memorial service on Saturday, October 24th at 1 p.m. at the home of his mother, Mrs. Jocelyn William Lewis, 1107 South 10th Street, Cordele, Georgia. Friends, that conclude our funeral notices for this morning. And as always, we do remind you concerning our pre-funeral arrangements planning available at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home, with packages available with a single pay, a 3-year pay, a 5-year pay, and a 10-year pay. So please stop by and talk with us concerning your pre-funeral
funeral arrangements needs available at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home, and also whole life insurance is available at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home. And now for announcements. The New Poplar Springs Baptist Church of Byronville, Georgia, invites everyone to worship with them today, Sunday, October 18th at 9:45 a.m. via conference call. Please dial 253-993-3761. 253-993-3761. The Reverend Johnny Dean, pastor, New Poplar Springs Baptist Church of Byronville, Georgia. The Greater Morris Tabernacle Missionary Baptist Church invite you to worship via conference call scheduled for today, Sunday, third Sunday in October at 9 a.m. Tuesday, midday prayer conference at 12 noon. Thursday, prayer meeting and Bible study at 6 p.m. The call-in number for the conference is 229-329-7611. 329-7611. The Greater Morris Tabernacle Missionary Baptist Church conference call at 9 a.m. or you may join the Facebook Live at 9 a.m. Everyone is invited. Mother Lucille Shazer, Church Mother, Deacon Kenneth Smith, Program Chairman, Deacon Tommy Ford, Vice Chairman of Deacons, Dr. K.M. Williams, Pastor. Friends, that conclude our announcements for this morning, and pray that you'll govern yourselves accordingly. And now for dedication. Our first selection this morning is dedicated to the following: in loving memory of Mrs. Susie Mae Hamilton, who would have celebrated her birthday October 3rd. Dedication requested by the Hamilton family, gone but not forgotten. In loving memory of Mrs. Mary Perry, who departed this life October 5th, 2012. Dedication requested by her beloved children, Sister Patricia Morrow, Sister Carolyn Bolton, the Reverend Charles Perry Jr., and Sister Angela Walker, gone but not forgotten. In loving memory of Mrs. Frederica Lewis, who would have celebrated her birthday October 6th. Dedication requested by the Lewis and Applin family, gone but not forgotten. In loving memory of Mrs. Bessie M. Lawson, who departed this life October 7th, 1994. Dedication requested by Gail, Johnny, Janae, and the entire Lawson family. Precious memory lingers still. In loving memory of Mrs. Emma Brinson, who departed this life October 11, 1972. And also in loving memory of Mr. Arthur Brinson, who departed this life October 12, 1952. Dedication requested by the Brinson and Montfrey family, gone but not forgotten. In loving memory of Mrs. Gail Melissa Westbrook Dawson, who departed this life October 19, 2015. Dedication requested by her beloved children, her beloved mother, Mrs. Martha Ruth Westbrook of Araby, Georgia, her brothers and sisters and their spouses, and the entire Westbrook family, gone but not forgotten. In loving memory of Mrs. Eula M. Rush of Americus, Georgia, dedication requested by her beloved daughters, Lois, Eula, Martha, and Laverne, gone but not forgotten. Our first selection this morning is dedicated to the following: happy 66th anniversary to our friend and brother, Deacon Willie Colson Jr. and his beloved wife, Mother Vanessa Colson, who is celebrating their birthday, their anniversary today, October 18. Dedication requested by the Colson Corbin family and all of the members of the St. James Missionary Baptist Church, where he serves as chairman of the Board of Deacons. Happy wedding anniversary to Deacon Willie Colson Jr. and Mother Vanessa Colson. God continue to bless your union. Our first selection this morning goes out to the following. Send out a very special happy birthday wish to Mr. Jimmy Lee Johnson of Albany, Georgia, who will celebrate his 92nd birthday Wednesday, October 21st. Dedication comes from his beloved wife, Evangelist Eva Johnson of Albany, Georgia, and the entire Johnson family there. And I believe we had a photo of Mr. Jimmy Johnson. Yeah, happy birthday to Deacon Jimmy Johnson of Albany, Georgia, who will celebrate his birthday Wednesday, October 21st, 92nd birthday. Dedication requested by his beloved wife, Evangelist Eva Johnson, and the entire family. Our first selection this morning goes out to the following. Happy birthday to Mr. Frederick Lewis, who celebrated his birthday Tuesday, October 6th. Dedication requested by the Lewis and Applin family. Happy birthday to Mrs. Clara Collier, who will celebrate her birthday Saturday, October 10th. Dedication requested by her beloved children, grandchildren, and the entire family. Happy birthday to Mrs. Jessie Lakeler, who celebrated her birthday October 10th. Dedication requested by her beloved niece, Mrs. Shanita Collier Grace, and family. Happy birthday to Mrs. Shirley Gail Lawson, who celebrated her birthday Tuesday, October 13th. And also happy birthday to Mr. Johnny Ingram, who will celebrate his birthday Friday, October 16th. Dedication requested by the Lawson and Ingram family. And I believe that's Miss Shirley Gail Lawson Ingram, who celebrated her birthday Tuesday, October 13th. Happy birthday and many, many more. It is certainly with the deepest regret that we make the following announcements. Deacon Arthur James McEntee, age 80, 130 Oak Street, Lilly, Georgia, died Saturday, October 10th at the home of his beloved son in Albany, Georgia. The funeral service for Deacon Arthur James McEntee will be held today, Sunday, October 18th at 12 noon, graveside at the Forest Chapel Baptist Church Cemetery in Pinehurst, Georgia. His pastor, the Reverend Willie E. Green, pastor of the Forest Chapel Baptist Church, will officiate. Miss Louise Denise Barron, age 75, 113 West 5th Avenue, Cordele, Georgia, died Wednesday, October 7th at the Phoebe Putney Memorial Hospital in Albany, Georgia. The funeral service for Miss Louise Denise Barron, age 75, will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangement. Little J.C. Adore Hawkins of 505 West 23rd Avenue, Cordele, Georgia, died Friday, October 16th at the Chris Regional Hospital in Cordele, Georgia. The funeral service for little J.C. Adore Hawkins will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. Mrs. Benny May Shorter Barthel, age 74, of 2812 South 10th Street, Cordele, Georgia, died Saturday, October 17 at Navison Health in Macon, Georgia. The funeral service for Mrs. Benny May Shorter Barthel, age 74, will be announced at a later date, pending the completion of the arrangements. The J.W. Williams Funeral Directors, serving Cordele and Vienna, are in charge of each of these arrangements during this week. Our program this morning is dedicated to the bereaved families whose loved ones were laid to rest during the past week. The family of Mrs. Janice Faye Brown Watkins of Vienna, Georgia, the family of United States Army veteran Mr. James Irvin Porter of Cordele, Georgia, the family of Mrs. Ethel Q. Johnson Outlaw of Davenport, Florida, the family of retired educator Mrs. Elma Brona Sneed Golphin of Americus, Georgia, the family of the infant Cole Jamel Taylor of Cordele, Georgia, the family of Mr. Michael Waters Sr. of Cordele, Georgia, the family of Mr. Justin Bernard Bryant of Vienna, Georgia, the family of Deacon John Lee Smith Sr. of Cordele, Georgia, the family of Mr. Lonnie Kendrick of Warner Robins, Georgia. This selection is dedicated to the bereaved families whose loved ones will be laid to rest during this week. The family of Mr. Arthur James McEntee, age 80, of Lilly, Georgia. The family of Mrs. Louise Denise Barron of Cordele, Georgia. The family of little J.C. Adore Hawkins of Cordele, Georgia. The family of Miss Benny Mae Shorter Barthel of Cordele, Georgia. Our program is dedicated to all of the sick and shut in, to all patients in the local and surrounding hospitals and nursing homes and rehabilitation centers, to our beloved ministers and their devoted family members, to all retired educators, to the men and women serving in our armed forces, both stateside and abroad, to all veterans, and to everyone who listens to our program on each Sunday morning. It's a pleasure for us to bring it to you. Our program goes out in memory of our past president, Dr. Napoleon Williams, to my wife, Mrs. Calandra Wickerson Parker. This selection goes out to my son, Jai Wickerson Parker. This selection goes out to my mother-in-law, Mrs. Billy Ann Hall and family. To my brother, retired Chief Master Sergeant Norman F. Dexter, to his wife, Dr. Gwendolyn Maxine Dexter of Vienna, Georgia. This selection goes out to my sister, Miss Mattie Mae Johnson, better known as Sister Girl, and Mrs. Patsy Jackson and her husband, Mr. Jim Jackson of Cordele, Georgia. This selection goes out to my nephew, Deacon Kenneth Smith Jr., program chairman of the Greater Morris Tabernacle Missionary Baptist Church. Goes out to our pastor, Dr. K.M. Williams of the Greater Morris Tabernacle Baptist Church, and to all of the members of the Gum Creek Missionary Baptist Association, which held their annual session via conference call this past week. Dr. K.M. Williams, moderator of the Gum Creek Missionary Baptist Association. And our program again goes out to everyone who listens to our program on each Sunday morning. It's a pleasure for us to bring it to you. It goes out especially to our beloved Miss Easter May Sanders, and hope that she's feeling well this morning. And thank you for all your texts there. God bless you. Goes out to each and every one of you. God bless you. Continue to stay safe. And remember that early voting has started. So do participate in early voting each day from 8 a.m. until 5 p.m. locally here at the Crisp County Courthouse. God bless you, and do exercise your right to vote. God bless you.
He's brought you from. Come on, say, come on, put your
Tune in again on next Sunday morning. In your time of need, contact the competent, capable, and dependable staff at the J.W. Williams Funeral Home.